freeing technologies, but actually they're for control. So let us move into the material, and after that we will do our meditations. And again, you're all invited to stay as long as you like. So, Second San Francisco Lecture Series, Spiritual Freedom. You know, this is not the easiest subject in the world to talk about. And I approach it always with a little bit of hesitancy. Always we've been talking about the spiritual way of living. And of course, the subject, spiritual freedom, is part of the spiritual way of life. Spiritual freedom is a result of the spiritual way of living. It is one of the results, but it has to be understood in order to be demonstrated. It has to be understood in order to be lived. In our material sense of life, we are in bondage. We are in bondage to hundreds of different thoughts and things. There's no denying it. We're so apt in the metaphysical world just to say, there is no accident in divine mind, or there's no bondage in divine mind. Of course, it is true. There isn't bondage in divine mind. It's also true that if we were living in divine mind, we would not be here speaking or listening to the subject. It's only because we haven't yet reached the life of divine mind that we are interested in a way or a path to achieve it. The term path or way is an interesting one. Jesus said, I am the way. But 600 years before Jesus, Lao Tzu's teaching in China was called the way. The term way refers to that spiritual faith that gives us freedom. If we were to achieve freedom, it must be freedom from some form of bondage. Actually, you know there is no freedom in spirit or soul because there isn't anything to be free of. There's only divine being. When we talk about spiritual freedom, we are talking really about a quality or condition of being that results from our search for and attainment of truth itself. I'm coming to this very, very slowly because I am, and I know that I am, on a delicate subject. You will appreciate it as I go along how delicate it is, because I'm going to say to you right here that I am leading up to the fact that there is a power greater than any of the powers you're familiar with in the human sense of life, and yet a power that you never will see, never hear, taste, touch, or smell. It is a power that you will discern only with your spiritual senses. And if you cannot be lifted up to the point of spiritual discernment, you never will know this meaning of spiritual freedom. That's what makes it delicate. The fact that it isn't something I can say to you intellectually and that you can grasp intellectually and then say, oh, I understand that. No. You would have a much easier time with the Einstein theory than you will with the subject of spiritual freedom, because there is the possibility of developing the human mind to the degree of grasping and understanding the Einstein theory. But you never can develop your human thinking, your human mind, your intellect to the degree that you will understand spirit and spirit activity. So remember that when we are, so remember that we are touching this from the standpoint of opening our consciousness to the recognition and the discernment of a presence and a power that you won't see. You will see the result of it, much in the same way that if you plant a seed in the ground, and if you were able to put a microscope over that seed and watch its full development, you never would see the life or activity producing what you can see through the microscope. In other words, you could watch the seed break open. You could watch the little formations come out. You could watch the roots take hold. You could watch the shoots come forth. But never do you see the life or the power, that which is called nature. You never can see nature or the activity of nature. You can see only its results. And so in this spiritual life, even when you've attained or are attaining spiritual freedom, you will never see, never actually witness that which is bringing it about. But as your consciousness of truth opens, as this seventh sense develops within you, then you will be able to enjoy this spiritual freedom. And in your higher moments of illumination, you will be able to see the whole of its experience, operation. We are told in scripture that, yet in my flesh have I seen God. It is possible, while yet being in what we call the human sense of life, to behold God, but not to behold God with the eyes. We behold God through the seventh sense, spiritual consciousness, or spiritual discernment. Now, let us start low down on the scale with the idea or thought of bondage to person, place, and thing. The mother who continuously is in fear of what will happen to her child cannot let the child out of her sight, and she is in this bondage. She is in bondage to mother love. She is in bondage to fear of a power apart from God, to fear that there is a power that can prevent God's protection from being made manifest. That is one form of bondage. There's another form of bondage that says we must live in that place where we were born, in that town or city or state or country. This is a form of bondage that won't permit us to be pioneers. This form of bondage won't permit us to get up and go and live where we want to live, build in some other place. That is a form of bondage too. There's another form of bondage, and that is bondage to payroll. We work so often under conditions that are not harmonious, conditions that do not make for happiness. We work for people who do not understand us. And the answer is, well, I need the money. In this sense of spiritual freedom, there is no denying your need for money. The only denial is that you have to be in bondage to a particular place of employment. The bondage consists of your acceptance of the belief that you can't break free and seek employment elsewhere, that you can't seek it in some line of work where you're happier or freer. That's a form of bondage too, remaining in a place where you, of your own volition, would never remain, or remaining in some line of activity where you, if you could select, if you could choose, would not remain. That's bondage. There is bondage to superstition, and we have so many forms of superstition. Not only being afraid to walk under a ladder, there are other forms of superstition, theological superstition, for instance. One of the great fears of people is that we will live to only 80 years and 10. That's a form of bondage, because when that thought grips you, you start right after your 50s to wonder how soon you'll be reaching 70 and how awful it's going to be. There's the law of heredity, which isn't a law, but a fear or a belief. The ancient Hebrews thought that the sins of the fathers are visited on the children unto the third and fourth generation. Yet 200 years later, they renounced that belief. But we here in this modern age have not accepted the renunciation. We've accepted their old superstitious beliefs. So we are walking around with diseases and habits due to heredity. We've accepted certain forms of limitation for ourselves because of racial heredity or religious or national heredity. That is a form of bondage. We meet many people in this world who are in bondage to their sins. These seem to be the most miserable of all because they cannot shake the idea. Their old religion, their old theology has impressed on them they've sinned against some law, usually some foolish man-made law, and that they are going to be eternally damned, not only here on earth, but even unto the future kingdoms. That is a form of bondage too, a very, very acute form of it. In the medical world, we are under the bondage of the beliefs in climate, the germ theory, the vitamin theory. These are forms of bondage arising from theories built on human histories. You might say, isn't there some truth to them? No, there isn't any truth to them because truth is of God, and none of those theories are of God. They are facts in the human sense of life. But the human sense of life is the bondage I'm talking about. I'm breaking down the human sense of life into these various forms. But the whole human sense of life, even when it is good, is a form of bondage. Now, of course, along with that comes all the beliefs incident to the material organism. The belief that there is life in the heart, or that when other organs, vital organs or functions are interfered with, our life is interfered with. Of course, right there, we are told, oh no, I understand that my life isn't interfered with, but my body is. What I'm saying is that your life isn't interfered with, nor is your body, except in proportion to your own bondage to the beliefs of materiality, the beliefs that the organs and functions of the body can contain within themselves the issues of life. That's a form of bondage to the body that has to be broken. And we have other forms of bondage too. It's really sad that even into our enlightened experience come those beliefs for our acceptance. Too often we do accept them and demonstrate them. With all these forms of bondage, you come up against the first commandment. Thou shalt have no other gods but me, no other power, no other presence, no other life, no other mind, no other intelligence, no other directing force but God. All of this other business is idolatry. It is placing faith and power in an effect. Don't ever forget this. We are not in the earth. That belief is a form of superstition and a form of bondage. The earth is within us. It is a formation of the infinite consciousness which I am. It is a form of divine being which has been made, created by that universal intelligence, which really is your individual consciousness. By all the laws of God, you yourself created the heavens and the earth, your consciousness, which you are, and therefore they are subject unto you. Let us be done with bondage to anything that exists in the realm of effect. We are not in bondage to our concepts of spiritual reality, nor are we in bondage to the reality itself. Our only bondage, if bondage it is, and it is a beautiful one, is the Christ, the divine idea of government, the divine idea of infinite intelligence, and this is the only thing that we are subject unto. Divine consciousness, universal consciousness, that which we call God, which is individual consciousness, yours and mine, that is the law of our individual being. Through that, we individually are given dominion over the things of the sea and the earth and the air and the sky. And when you either knowingly or unknowingly permit something in the realm of effect to be a law unto you, you have become in bondage to it. For the world at large, there is an excuse. The world at large has never been told that we are the law unto our own being. The world has been taught about God somewhere off in the skies, or a God on a cross, and given the teaching that we are worms of the dust, or that we are mortals, or that we are humans, and that we are subject to all of these different influences. Since they accept that teaching, not knowing any better, we cannot blame the people of the world when they come under the bondage of these material and theological beliefs. But for you and for me, there is no excuse. We've been taught in metaphysics, taught our true identity. We have had called to our attention those passages of Scripture which ordinarily are never brought to the attention of Christians or the Jewish world. We've been taught, for instance, that we are joint heirs with Christ. We've been taught all that I have is thine. And we have been taught that this applies to you and to me today, not merely to some Jesus Christ of 2,000 years ago. It applies literally and unconditionally to you and to me individually. Therefore, for us, there is no excuse when we knowingly bring ourselves under the bondage to these man-made beliefs and so-called laws. There are still many forms of bondage that we come under through our ignorance because we haven't really progressed far in this study and practice of truth. We are really only at the first outer rim of the subject. We are far from being at the center. So there probably is plenty that we do not understand. And because of that lack of understanding, we are in bondage. But there is so much that we do know and that we do not consciously practice, that at this point, it becomes necessary to remind ourselves, how many superstitions am I accepting? How many phases of bondage am I accepting? Even with the little understanding that I have, I should be freer. Freedom begins when we recognize that God is divine. God is divine consciousness. God is divine mind, and that his consciousness is yours and mine. From that moment on, I and the Father are not only one, but consciously one. It was always true of everyone that I and the Father are one, but not having the conscious awareness of it made it impossible for the manifestation to be made. In other words, our freedom comes not because of our relationship with God. It comes because of our conscious awareness of that relationship. Never forget that. I and the Father are one is the relationship between God and every individual. But that will not stop us from building jails and hospitals and insane asylums. We only benefit from our relationship with God in proportion to our conscious awareness of it. You remember our favorite passages. Thou wilt keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee. Stayed. Pray without ceasing. Those are the passages that must be brought to our remembrance over and over again, so that we remind ourselves of our true identity. Because in the conscious awareness of the presence of God, in the conscious awareness of our true identity, lies our freedom. The particular idea has evolved that nothing external to my consciousness has power over me. Well, of course, in reality, there is nothing external to consciousness. What was meant is that nothing that exists as an effect or as a concept of an effect has power over me. Now, even when you see up here as me, now even what you see up here as me is not the reality. You are seeing the universal concept of the individualization of God. But even that concept, which you are seeing up here, has no jurisdiction over you, no government, not even for good. Nor has any effect of God any power over you or dominion over you. In other words, your consciousness itself is the power unto all formation, and through that knowledge, it becomes the power over every concept of every formation. Take your lungs. They're not divine realities. God did not create them. They are universal concepts, however, of some divine idea, some divine faculty or activity. Then, in understanding that the infinite divine consciousness, which I am, is the law unto its spiritual creation, we are brought to dominion over even the concept called a heart or a stomach. That is how a metaphysical treatment operates. Metaphysical treatment never touches the concept called foot or leg or stomach or head. Metaphysical treatment is the realization of God, divine consciousness, being the substance, law, and cause of all spiritual creation. The knowledge of that truth gives us dominion over our concept of that spiritual creation. That sounds deep, doesn't it? It isn't as deep as it sounds. It's only because the subject isn't an easy one. God is spirit. Therefore, the universe is spiritual. Now, you haven't seen that universe of God except in your moments of illumination, of spiritual illumination. You may then, through your developed spiritual consciousness, behold it. But in the ordinary walks of life, you never come into contact with either God or God's creation. You come in contact with the world's concept, the race concept of that creation, and your knowledge of the truth of God as infinite being, the one power. And as all creation is subject to that power, gives you dominion over this world of concept. That, of course, is a subject that has to be carried out more and more and more until we come into the realization of what it means and why it means it, and into the ability then to demonstrate it. Now, when we take the first step towards spiritual freedom, we do it by conscientiously realizing that nothing appearing as an external world is a power over me. Whether that is a heart, whether it is a brain, or whether it is a force or a bomb or a bit of food or a germ, our first sense of freedom must come when we accept consciously the truth that nothing out here has power over us, except in proportion as we give it power. It of itself has not the power. We, by fearing it, can give it power. Oh yes, there might be a chair back there with a white sheet thrown over it, and we may assume it to be a ghost and sit here and tremble all night and die of heart failure. Not because it had any power over us, only because we, in our perceiving it as it is, through believing that something external could have power, would give it the power to govern us and control us. You say, well, that's true of the chair with the sheet over it, but suppose it were a ghost. Well, the same thing would apply. Even if there is such a thing in existence as a ghost, it can exist only as the effect of consciousness. Therefore, it cannot be power over the consciousness that must have produced it. We ourselves impart power to these effects of the world or effects of God's creation. And only in that degree do we have power over us. Excuse me, only in that degree do they have power over us. We have spoken of this before too, that our bondage to dollars comes only from the belief that we accept dollars as power, purchasing power. Actually, the power is in our own being. The dollars are given to us as a medium of exchange. The same as a streetcar transfer. As streetcar transfers are. The dollars have a greater value, but they are the same thing. They are forms of exchange. But we can have as many of them as we can open our consciousness to. We must develop our freedom from the belief that the power of supply is in the dollar. Transfer that power to your own consciousness and say, no, the power of supply is within my own consciousness, governing this world of dollars. Then automatically you break the bondage, which really is a fear. You know the old scriptural words, the love of money is the root of all evil. The love of money, or the hate of it, or the fear of it, is the bondage, the evil. It isn't the money itself. Money is a glorious thing. It's just as glorious as fine clothing or fine transportation. Money is a beautiful thing. But the moment we give it power over us, dominion over us, we've lost our own spiritual freedom. We could go on with this, for days and days and days. We very often are afraid of dictatorships in world government, and we are afraid of the law on this or that instead of realizing that we ourselves constitute all the law there is. The law abides within our own consciousness. When we know that we can be free, regardless of what form of government may appear, it doesn't really make any difference. There are men in slave countries that are free. Those who have been able to accept within their own consciousness their freedom are free. Bondage is in our own superstition, our own belief, our own acceptance of a presence and power apart from God. The very moment you can accept in your consciousness, in your thoughts, the idea that God created you free, that God gave you dominion, in that moment, the world knows your freedom and makes way for you. Do you know that you yourself control the world's reaction to you? You do so by your own estimate of your own being. Where is bondage? In one's own belief that that is where all bondage is. If you are entertaining a sense of bondage to a person, place, thing, circumstance, or condition, it is in your own being. It's in your own consciousness, and that is where you have to meet it. You have to learn that God is infinite mind, infinite intelligence, infinite consciousness, and that is your mind. Therefore, you are equal before God. You are equal before God and man. Christ isn't Jew and Christ isn't Christian. Christ is the divine spirit of individual being and is the spirit of God in man. Everybody has it, regardless of race, religion, color, or creed. But unless you and I consciously accept it, we won't project it. If we do not consciously accept it, the fellow out there can't feel it. Out there, you feel my state of consciousness, and I can feel your state of consciousness. You can't miss it. Every time you go to a restaurant and are waited on by a waiter or waitress, you feel the state of consciousness of that individual. You know it for what it is. And when you go into a business place and you know the same thing, it's up to you to develop your freedom, the degree of your freedom. Now, having agreed that nothing in the external world has power over us for good or for evil, we've brought our attention and thought back to that which is within our own being, reality. We've brought our thoughts back now to where we can turn within in meditation or communion and there find the Father within. Have you ever thought how many times you've read in the New Testament about the Father within? Have you ever thought about how many times you've read in Paul, I live, yet not I. Christ liveth in me. And have you ever thought how seldom you have sat down with yourself and said, I must get acquainted with this Father within me, and find that what Paul was talking about? No, most of us never find the Father within, the Christ. Those who do usually are on the inspirational or metaphysical path. But even there, it really is sad how few ever decide to investigate and find out if what Jesus said is true. The Father is within you. Here again, it is through conscious effort that you contact the Christ or Father within your own being. Until you do, you cannot gain spiritual freedom. Spiritual freedom does not come from any statements of truth that you know. Spiritual freedom does not come through anything you've learned with your intellect. All you can learn through the mind and the intellect is about spiritual freedom. But spiritual freedom itself is attained when you have touched the Christ of your own being, when you have actually felt the divine presence within you. That's why I tell you again, we are dealing with a very, very deep subject. We are dealing with the reality, with that which is invisible to our outer senses, and which therefore must be met with within our own consciousness. And each one has to do that for himself. There's no easy road. There's no royal way. We have helps on the way in the form of spiritual literature, teachings, and teachers, and they constitute the way. But the way, you know, is a path, and a path always goes someplace. And Jesus said, I am the way. The Christ is the way. Christ is the path to lead you to the kingdom of God. You know, the leaning on Jesus was so tremendous that he told them very frankly that if I go not away, the Comforter will not come to you. It is a marvelous thing to have practitioners and teachers, but it's a terrible thing to have them for too long. It's a wonderful thing to be able to lean on somebody in this spiritual path for help, for guidance, for healing. But excuse me. But it's a terrible thing to keep on leaning and leaning and leaning and never finding your spiritual freedom. In certain religious teachings, there are masters, just as in the ancient days, Jesus was a master. But too often people get the idea that these masters are to take over your mind and your life and govern it and run it for you. And that's very bad business. A master is one to whom you can go, one who has achieved some measure of spiritual freedom, which means some measure of non-attachment to the things and thoughts of the world. Through his help and cooperation, you can be lifted up into a state of spiritual consciousness, spiritual discernment, where you yourself realize the master of your own consciousness. The master is not a man. The master is a state of unfolding and developed consciousness. A man like Jesus had this master consciousness probably to the greatest degree ever known. But look what use people were making of it. They go around and they use the name Jesus Christ and they repeat it as if the name of itself had a virtue. And they say that the reason the name has virtue is because it was the name of the Master of Galilee, and therefore he was imbued with his great spirit. You know, it would be sad if that were true, but it isn't true. I doubt if there was any Hebrew in Galilee who had a Greek name. Jesus the Christ are both Greek names. Christ isn't even a name. It is the Savior, divine consciousness. And Jesus wasn't Jesus Christ, but Jesus the Christ. Although in his day on earth it wasn't either Jesus or the Christ. The man Jesus was Hebrew, an Aramaic named Joshua, not Jesus. Now, if the name Jesus Christ were the name of a man who had attained mastership, certainly the name didn't attain mastership. It was the consciousness that attained mastership, and nothing but that consciousness will be the master unto you. Jesus said, if I do not leave you, the Comforter, the Master, cannot come unto you. Why? Because the Master is the divine state of consciousness, and one which you and I attain in some measure. Again, the degree to which we lose our hate, fear, and love of that which appears as person, place, or thing, circumstances, or condition, in the degree that we become non-attached to the things of this world, so that ultimately, in some measure, we can say, I have overcome the world. In other words, I can use the things of the world or leave them alone. I can pick up my life or lay it down. I can enjoy good food or get along with a sandwich. In the degree that we learn non-attachment, in that degree do we attain the master consciousness. Now, those like Jesus Christ are a help to us. They are an inspiration. They are more than that. When we come into the atmosphere of their individual beings or through their writings or in groups, we automatically are lifted up nearer and nearer to the actual realization and demonstration of the master consciousness. The master consciousness has appeared on earth many times through many individuals. Actually, the master consciousness has appeared on earth in millions of people, only not in the full degree that it appeared here in the person of Jesus Christ. From the effect of the man's life, there's no doubt that he must have attained it probably to the highest degree ever known. If not, there can be only one or two others who have attained such a degree of master consciousness. The rest of us can be very well satisfied if we attain enough of the master consciousness to be able to have dominion over our own individual experience and to be able to be of help to those who come within range of our thoughts. The master consciousness likewise brings itself forth in messages, in books, thereto in the degree. I'm giving right now wonderful experiences in hearing and receiving letters from people who just through reading Infinite Way and others of these books are witnessing healings and improved conditions in their lives. These do not come because of the man, but because a certain state of consciousness has externalized itself in print, and those who are able to catch some measure of that are able to benefit by it. It hasn't anything to do with the man any more than it has to do with Jesus. Jesus was that avenue who was able to say, the Father within me doeth the work. It is the state of consciousness that came through here and put those words out on paper. I wonder if you can conceive for a minute of what happens when these ideas and thoughts come through and get themselves down on paper. How completely independent they are of a person. I would just like to tell you two little instances of this in the hope that you can catch the idea what I mean by spiritual freedom or master consciousness. One night I was in meditation for what I suppose was several hours. Later, about 3 a.m, I was awakened without knowing why, jumped out of bed, picked up pen and paper, and started to write. Out of it came this Nightingale of the East. It's the front piece of spiritual interpretation of scripture and is out on cards, motto, or greeting cards. Another time there came forth a thing that is sung as a sacred solo all over the land. The soloist at the Mother Church in Boston did it for a record that went all around the world. Its name is Truly There Is No Night There. I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me. Christ performeth these things through me. This consciousness goes before one to make the crooked places straight. You know that there isn't a metaphysical practitioner in the world that hasn't felt that sense or presence at some time in his healing work. Probably not with every healing, but there is no doubt that I speak from many, many years of experience and from acquaintance with hundreds of practitioners. I've never known one who had not had the transcendental experience in which they felt the click of this super consciousness, of the master consciousness of reality, in which they beheld the spiritual creation, even if only for a second. Sometimes it came as light. It came in other ways and forms, but it was a click. Spiritual freedom, then, is a freedom that comes from grace. It does not come from taking thought. It does not come through mental effort. The taking of thought and the mental effort may lift us to a place where we can realize that freedom and power. My thoughts are not your thoughts, said the Lord. So none of your thoughts give you your spiritual freedom, but right thinking may lift you to the place where the divine thought does come through. I think you're asking the question, how do you obtain this consciousness? Or how do you attain this spiritual freedom? That's the natural question after all of this. I've given you an indication that one way, of course, is through contact with someone who has attained some measure of it. Going to him or her, either as practitioner or teacher, or going to the writings which show such liberation. But there is another way, and a way that will make you independent of all this outside. It lies in your own development of a listening attitude. If you can practice from the minute you awaken in the morning until you sleep at night, practice the listening ear, you will get there. So let's practice the listening ear.